Hi, and welcome to this session on using social media to change the world. I'm Hautalampi. I'm a social media specialist and the global social media lead for UN Women. UN Women is a United Nations entity working on gender equality and women's empowerment. We are based out of New York, and my team focuses mainly on the English global channels. We work closely with the regions and countries around the world, and UN Women has a joint following of 14 million across our social media platforms. So today I will be sharing with you my thoughts around using social media strategically and making good use of your content and your time and efforts. And I will be sharing some example of our work as I go along. So in addition to the strategy and content side of things, I will also touch on ways of working as well as evaluation and doing a social media audit. So I'd love to find out more about you. You know, what kind of social media work do you do? What challenges are you facing? And any thoughts that might come across your mind as you listen to my presentation, or indeed if you've got any questions or any feedback, that's always welcome. So you can tweet or DM me on Twitter at Hautalampi. If you're able to spell my name, you will definitely find me. There's only one of me in the world. So I hope to hear from you on Twitter. And I'd love for you to go into this session, with the goal of learning something, or at least, getting a new perspective on how you're doing your work. So please do take notes. I would really highly encourage you to do so. So what does it mean to use social media strategically? In my opinion, it all starts with goals. So your social media use should support your organizational goals and your communications goals. Also, the choice of audiences should be based on those organizational goals. So who are the primary and secondary audiences that your organization wants to reach? And how does social media help, fill those gaps? And where can social media help you reach those audiences? So it's very important to have an up-to-date and realistic understanding of who you actually are reaching and who are your active followers. And based on that, you can then make the channel choice and start developing your content and choose your indicators to map the levels of engagement that you're able to reach. Also having a clear, workflow is very important, knowing roles and responsibilities, who does what and when, and then finally building an evidence base through analytics, insights, and evaluation. So I invite you to look through the strategy lens as I share some examples and, consider your own work and the strategic angle that you can bring to it. So I will ask you 3 questions. This is for your reflection. So what are the goals for your organization's social media use? And what have been the goals for recent posts that you've been doing on social media? Who are your audiences? So who are your target audiences? And who are you actually reaching through your social media posts? And then finally, what does success look like for you? So what indicators are you looking at? What type of engagement are you aiming for? What kind of targets do you have? And are you reaching those targets? Our social media use definitely has a goals and purpose. So depending on what kind of work we've got going on or what's going on in the world, our content roughly caters to these different goals. So we will talk about our work and the impact it's having in the world. How are we advancing gender equality? What kind of change for good are we making for women and girls, for their rights, for their participation? How can we encourage women and girls and activists around the world to keep doing their work? What kind of recent data or information do we have that we should be sharing? And who are our partners? What are we doing with them? And what is our take on what's going on in the world? So here's an example of when cases of sexual violence started emerging from Ukraine early on in the war. So there's a position a statement from us condemning the rapes. The second example I have here is from a recent policy brief, also related to the war in Ukraine and its global effect, global impact on fuel and food. And really just to flag that food insecurity isn't just about going hungry, but that for women and girls, it actually has very serious repercussions in with women and girls ending up being trafficked or going into early marriage. There might be transactional sex. So there's all kinds of things that one might not immediately think about when one thinks about food insecurity. I like to think that every post should have, a goal, or we should have a clear idea of what we're trying to achieve with every single post. Have an idea of the kind of level of engagement we're looking for and who is the audience. So here's an example of our fairly recent Afghanistan campaign. This was done around 15th of August, when it was the 1 year since the Taliban takeover. And we developed a set of assets and messaging that we were sharing around that day. And this performed really well for us. So for me, I like to look at the combined number of likes and retweets to assess content performance. And for me, anything below 100 is not good. Let's say between 100 and 200, so the number of retweets and likes combined, that's average. And then as we start going over 300, or in this case, as we start going over 1,000, that's good engagement. Then I'm really happy. So that's what I like to do. And I try to look at not necessarily every single post, but certainly key posts. And I will also click on who retweeted and who liked. So I will scroll through those lists on Twitter just to get an idea for who is engaging with our content. And I might click through to their profiles, to get a bit of an idea of who they are, where they are, what they do, and also keep an eye on the level of fake accounts active on our channels. Now, in terms of content, what are the different elements that go into content development? Obviously, it all starts with strong messaging. Depending on your organization, you might work together with different departments to develop the messaging and make sure that it's all accurate. If you're sharing any data or stats, you have to verify the sources in case your audience asks you, so that you are able to share them confidently. Considering the context that you're posting in is very important. So being in touch with your audiences, what's going on for them, what kind of comments are you getting, what things are people talking about, are there any issues that you need to be aware of? So just to make sure that you don't post anything that is not the right tone for what's going on your channels. Format, is it going to be a text-only thing? Will you be posting a link? Will there be some assets? Will there be video? So considering all of that, and then obviously the channel choice should also inform the format. And then finally, what's the call to action to your audience? What is it that you want them to do? So in this example, we've got a piece of inspirational content. This is one of our evergreen assets that we regularly post. And the call to action is to name a strong woman who has inspired you. If you don't have an outright call to action to your reader, you will probably still have some sort of goal for the post. What do you want the person to do as a result of seeing your post? Is it clicking a link or something else? So it's good to have that clarity so that you can assess your content performance. Now, a bit about ways of working. So the way we work is we obviously do planning. We've got for the year ahead, there are certain key dates that we always mark, where we will always be doing a social media package. So days like International Women's Day, Day of the Girl, as well as 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence. In addition to these big key moments, we do weekly planning. So we look at any days ahead, any smaller international days, any anniversaries, any events happening that we should be talking about on our social media. And then we do the scheduling on an ongoing basis, but the approval of the outgoing posts is done daily. So typically the night before, I will go through our drafts, I will tweak them and approve them, and they will then go out across our channels. The reason why I think it's good to not have content approved too far in advance is to make sure that you don't inadvertently post something where the tone is not appropriate. So let's say there's something happening, like, for example, what's going on in Iran at the moment. It may not be appropriate then to post very positive content, just simply because it will be out of touch with what's concerning our audiences at the moment. And sometimes planning has to be done on an hourly basis. So if there is an urgent thing that needs to go out, something happens in the world that we need to have our take on, or have a positioning on, do a statement on, that might then result in planned content being shuffled around or being postponed. So while we have bigger ongoing priorities such as Ukraine, Afghanistan, any ongoing challenges or issues for women's rights, then there are also emerging things that come and need to be taken into consideration. We use Trello for our draft content. So we've got a private Trello board where we work on content, we develop messaging, we develop social media assets, and we do that collaboratively, leaving comments and refining things as we go along. And once things are ready to ship, we bring them to our public social media board on Trello. So all of this is publicly available. We've got a calendar here of upcoming days, and this is where we add any content that we've got for the day, for colleagues and the wider UN system to use, and of course for anybody. So if you feel like sharing some of our content, you're more than welcome to do so. This is also where we have thematic content, so-called evergreen content that doesn't really go out of date, that we can come back to and keep scheduling again and again. Now, nobody can do social media alone. I know some people have to, but it's really not recommended, because nothing beats teamwork. And so here we try to create a space for the team to be creative, and where all that comes from is allowing people to be themselves and identifying what their strengths are and encouraging people to work to their strengths. And when I'm recruiting, I like to see where the gaps are, what kind of skills or what kind of areas are missing expertise, and then I would hire to fill those gaps. And I think it's really important to have an atmosphere where people feel that they can express their opinions, and they can be critical, they can ask critical questions, because with that kind of critical questioning approach, we can really create something really good and solid, because it's been sort of, stress tested, so to speak. So all of this leads to creativity and really good output. And I would highly recommend anyone managing a team to pay attention to the atmosphere that they're creating for the team, particularly when you're working remotely and being creative remotely, which can sometimes be challenging. So I wanted to share next some of my favorite tactics. So some ideas for expanding reach is going live. I really like Twitter Spaces. I'm a very active Twitter Space listener. We've done one Twitter Space at UN Women last year, which was very successful. Obviously, there's the classic one of live tweeting from events using the event hashtag and getting new followers in that way. Instagram collaborations is a good one. Twitter is also testing the collaboration feature at the moment. And then asking your audience to retweet and share. And for us, that's working really well. So for example, this tweet here, we had over 800 retweets. So this way we can get onto the feeds and networks of people who are following us, but whose followers might not be following us. Some ideas for quick wins in terms of content. I already mentioned the evergreen content. So content that always performs well. So regularly recycling that, rescheduling it. Don't be afraid of using the same content. The memory on social media is quite short, particularly on platforms like Twitter, where content lives for a very short moment and isn't always seen by all of your followers, or in most cases, I should say, it's only seen by a very small percentage of your followers, depending on who happens to be active when you publish. Versioning is another idea. So if you're working with a set of key messages and you've got too much content to fit into 280 characters, just create versions, just have several drafts and you can then keep scheduling those. So that's a quick win. Instagram stories, so sharing your old content onto stories or sharing content from others is a great way of getting activity on your channels. And as we know, stories get a lot of views, sometimes much more than the feed does. So it's a good way of getting into people's in front of their eyes. And we also used Instagram stories actually to collect questions for our Twitter space. So sometimes you might not be able to get that much input on Twitter. So you can use Instagram stories and the story stickers to ask people to share their questions around a specific topic. In our case, it was ending violence against women and girls. But in your case, it will probably be something else. But I would really recommend using stories creatively. And then finally, quote tweets. Obviously, someone else has gone through the trouble of creating the content and you're just adding your take on it. So that's another quick one. Now, how does one manage engagement, particularly if and when one has to sometimes post about niche events or content that is only relevant to a part of your audience? So what I like to do is I like to look at the engagement levels. And if I see that engagement levels are dropping, then I usually like to bring in one of those evergreen contents or content that I know will be getting a lot of positive engagement. It's also a good idea to limit the number of tweets you do. For example, if you're doing a campaign or you're doing tweeting around an event, don't go crazy with the numbers. And the first post is usually the most important one, we've noticed. So when you announce something, it's the first post that gets shared. So getting that one right, making sure that it looks good, everything's correct, all the handles, hashtags, assets, everything's in it, is really worth the effort. Another quick one for managing engagement is giving the first few incoming comments a like. This is less less used on Twitter, but on places like Instagram, where if you're posting some positive comment and you get comments from people, emojis, or they're sharing it with their friends, just giving a like to those first few things to show people that you are appreciative of them commenting and sharing your content, and also to show that you actually are there. There's a person behind those posts. We also use inspirational quotes quite a bit. Those usually tend to get nice engagement. So that's another quick way of boosting engagement. And when I talk about engagement, what is engagement? So these are all the different ways that people can engage with your content. So my list here goes from the most passive to the most active. So starting with just looking at it and actually being participating. So maybe submitting a question through Instagram stories or joining your live stream or leaving you a comment. And this is where you would pick your indicators. So what type of engagement are you looking for? Ideally, maybe 3 things. I wouldn't go too crazy with the numbers, so that it's very clear to you, what are you looking for? And then normally you would always use those same indicators so that you can build up a baseline and start comparing your performance over time. Now, next, I wanted to talk a bit about measuring success. So here are 3 questions. How far is your content traveling? Is it reaching the right audiences? And how is it being received? So these are the indicators you would look at depending on what the goal is. So if your goal is to get your content to travel far, you really would look for shares and you would keep an eye on, the views and impressions that you are getting. If you want to reach a specific audience, you would then drill down into who was reacting, who was sharing, who was commenting, what kind of comments. And then finally, if you want to understand, how is your content being received, you would, of course, look at the nature of the comments that you're getting in, but this is where you would look at the numbers. So this is where you would look at those engagement indicators that you have picked, general sentiment, though I wouldn't really trust the sentiment tools because they're not smart enough just yet. And also look at the engagement ratio. So sometimes a smaller account might have a higher engagement ratio than a big one. So what I'm saying with this is that some content is better coming from an individual's account. In our case, it would be our executive director, because she will get really good engagement versus our huge account where engagement might not be proportionately as high. Knowing your audience. So this is where I would recommend regularly doing a social media audit. This can be something you do once a year. Whenever I join a new role, this is one of the first things that I get my team to do. So I want to see the demographics. So I want to see who are the actual active followers on each of our social media channels. This is a little bit time consuming, but I think it's fine to work with a smaller sample. So you don't have to look at hundreds and hundreds of tweets and posts and who liked and who shared, but rather you would pick key strategic posts. So let's say a key announcement for you or a key date in the year, and you would look at that specific one. So you would spend a bit of time just browsing through, who shared, who liked, who are they, and are they actually people in your target primary audience. And then you should also look at what didn't get the engagement. So, also to understand what is not of interest to your audience. Now here, of course, it's important to make sure that the content did get in front of people. So you would always look at the number of impressions also in relation to lower performing content. And share your insights. Any sort of analysis that you do, it's always good to share it with others and sort of get their views on it, and get their questions and make sure that it's well rounded. So coming to the end of my presentation now, here are a few sort of takeaways or summary. Be clear about what you're trying to achieve and why. And make sure you've got an up-to-date understanding of the channels, of the active audiences, and also of new features that might be helpful for you to increase your reach. Consistency is very important, and this is where planning comes into the picture. Have a fairly similar tone of voice on each channel, and also the type of content you post. It's good to keep it consistent. This is important also for your branding and brand recognition. As I said before, instead of bombarding people and seeing your engagement levels plummet, be selective and write a few good tweets around a specific event or theme or topic, and then make sure to drive up that engagement if needed with those evergreen posts. Collect evidence and use it to inform your work. So on a monthly basis, I would recommend that you pull out a report on your social media post performance and do a bit of analysis why you think things went the way they did. And on most social media management platforms, you can actually automate these reports. So you can send them to yourself, send them to your bosses, and have a look at the start of every month. If you'd like to hear more about my work, please do check out this episode from Sprout Social in their Social Creatures podcast series. You can find me there, and you can hear more about the work I do. At this point, I'd like to hear any of your takeaways from this presentation. So please do tweet or DM me and share those with me. You can also find me on LinkedIn in case you want to connect there. I thank you for your time and your attention. It was great to share some of my thoughts with you, and I wish you all the success with your social media work. Thank you so much. Bye.